Phonemic awareness is the foundation of both reading and writing. I want to go back to Scarborough's rope. There are two equal parts to understand reading. One is language comprehension, and we've talked about background knowledge so far. And the second is word recognition, being able to read the words on the page. We talked about decoding and sight word recognition last section. Today, we're really talking about phonemic awareness, hearing the individual sounds in a word and how that's the base of reading and writing. And we want to remember, we want to be automatic with these skills. Phonemic awareness is hearing those individual sounds. And this is a brand new skill for our brain. Our brains aren't designed to hear the individual sounds. We actually need to create new connections in order to do this. Our brains are designed to hear a word, table, and know what it is. Our brains aren't designed to hear the individual sounds, t, a, b, l, within that word. But we need to do that since our language is an individual sound-based language. Blending is the base of reading. In blending, we're hearing the sounds ch, I, n, putting them together to hear chin. That's the basis of reading. In segmenting, we're thinking of a word, pet, and we're hearing each sound in order to write it down. Pet, p, e, t, pet. Now I have a large handout about phonemic awareness, and I don't want you to panic about how big it is. Skip down to the starred items. If your learner can do that starred item easily, then skip down to the next starred item. If you get to a starred item that your learner isn't doing easily, then you can go backwards and do some of those activities before that starred item to help your learner get to the place where they can be automatic with that starred item. I want to stress that we're focusing on individual sounds and not letters. So for example, with the word light, there are 3 sounds, l, I, t, light. When I'm working with learners, if they're struggling with a word that is at their level, and it's not a word that is a sight word where it's spelled in a unique way, I really want them to hear those individual sounds. So first I'll ask, how many sounds do you hear in ship? Sh, I, p. 3. I agree. I think there are 3 sounds in ship. What are the sounds? The first sound is sh. I agree. What's the middle sound? I. Yeah, what's the next sound? P. Excellent. Ship, sh, I, p. Now that's all phonemic awareness. That's all happening before we're even adding the letters. Now, once we add the letters, now we're talking about phonics or decoding. So how would you write the sound sh? I agree. SH is going to spell the sound sh. How are you going to write the sound I? How are you going to write the sound p? And now we have sh, I, p, ship. Excellent. So what if we have a word that doesn't follow the traditional spelling easily? Well, then we're going to look for the parts that are spelled in a logical way and point out the part that isn't. So for example, with the word said, the s is spelled just like we think it would be. The d is spelled just like we think it would be. But the middle sound, s, d, is spelled with an AI. That's really unusual. So the only thing we need to remember about that word is that the sound is spelled with an AI, and that's why I put a heart over it. That's the part we need to remember, that in said, we're spelling with an AI. I also want to point out with bike, there are 3 sounds, b, I, k, but there's that silent E at the end. So if you're doing individual sounds, you're just sticking that silent E in with the k sound because it doesn't make any sound, so it doesn't get its own sound space. I want to show where we're going with this. When your reader is reading more complicated words, then you're breaking them up into syllables. Every syllable has a vowel sound. Your chin goes down when it's a vowel sound. You don't have to break them up into syllables perfectly. You just need to break them into syllables in a logical way. So for example, if your learner can't read this word and is working on it, you might break it up into syllables. right? So now your learner just has to read that first syllable, ack, and then the next syllable, calm, calm. Then the next syllable, plish, accomplish. Then the last syllable, meant, accomplishment. Now I want to point out, right, you don't have to break them up into perfect syllables. You could break them up like I did in the first example, accomplishment, or you could break it up, accomplishment. Either way is just fine, as long as they're generally in chunks. For writing, if your learner wants to write unsuspecting, you're going to ask, what are the syllables you hear? How many chunks do you hear in that word? Un, sus, peck, ting. I agree, there are 4 chunks. So now with each chunk, you're thinking about each individual sound. Just like in reading, with each chunk, you are sounding out each individual sound. So in unsuspecting, what's the first chunk? Un. What are the individual sounds you hear in un? Great. What are the individual sounds in sus? Great. Now we have peck. What are the individual sounds in peck? Peck. What are the individual sounds in ting? T, I, right? So you're really spelling with individual sounds, even though you're spelling a large word, but you're doing it syllable by syllable. And again, you don't have to be perfect in how you're dividing the word. Unsuspecting or unsuspecting, either way is just fine. So to practice, how many sounds, how many individual sounds do you hear in spring? Write down your answer or just remember it. 5. S, p, I, spring. 5 sounds. How many sounds do you hear in Oreo? O, E, O, Oreo. There are 4 sounds in Oreo. How many sounds do you hear in measure? M, E, J, 4 sounds in measure. How many sounds do you hear in through? Ooh, through. 3 sounds. I agree, 3 sounds. Now you don't need to be perfect. If you saw spring and you did s, p, ing, and put the I and the ng together, that's just fine. You're still hearing most of the individual sounds. You don't have to be perfect. You're not going to break your learner by combining some of the sounds, but as best you can, you're going to put them into individual sounds.